Rooted. She glanced toward her house. The windows glowed faintly gold, the porch swaying slightly in the wind. She turned back toward the trail, her voice soft, final. She handed me poison. I handed her just one documented bite at a time. My daughter-in-law slapped a new label on my lasagna. Old meat. Use soon. She posted it online, laughing while my son stirred his coffee like I wasn't standing there. That night, I installed a freezer cam and locked up my will. By week's end, her name was gone from everything: trust, property, power of attorney. She moved into my home like it was a prize. I made sure it became a case file. Before we begin, may I ask where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The dishwasher hummed low behind her, steam curling from the vent like breath in cold air. Janet stood by the open freezer in the mudroom, her reading glasses slipping halfway down her nose. She was just reorganizing, making space, clearing her mind when her eyes froze on a Ziploc bag she didn't recognize. The label was bold, scrawled in thick black Sharpie. Old meat. Use soon. She blinked, then reached in and pulled another. Same label. Another. And another. 4 in total, each bag holding her carefully packed portions of last week's chicken casserole, pot roast, and 2 slices of her Christmas meatloaf, wrapped in foil with date stickers she'd always used. She stared at the handwriting. It wasn't hers. It was Maggie's rounded letters, overly neat, like a PTA sign-up sheet trying to look spontaneous. From the kitchen came the clink of plates and the unmistakable voice of Maggie, drifting in on a breeze of smug amusement. Seriously, it's like leftovers from the 40s, she laughed, not bothering to lower her voice. Todd gave a low chuckle. I think that meatloaf has voting rights. Janet didn't move. She didn't even breathe. The cold from the freezer rose up into her wrists. Emma's footsteps were quiet, cautious. She came around the corner, her socked feet barely making a sound on the hardwood. Grandma? Her voice was soft. You okay? Janet didn't turn. She just nodded once, not trusting the muscles in her face. I can help clean up if you want, Emma offered, already reaching for a dish towel. In the kitchen, Maggie's tone turned syrupy. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go finish your sketchbook? Let the adults take care of the mess for once. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Janet gently touched her arm. It's fine, she said. Go on, love. I've got this. Emma hesitated, her eyes flicking from Janet's face to the freezer bag still clutched in her grandmother's hand. But she nodded and walked away, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to make herself smaller. Janet stood alone again in the mudroom. The bags felt heavier than they should have, like they weren't holding food anymore, but something older, sourer. Not leftovers, not even disrespect, dismissal. She moved slowly, deliberately, placing the bags back in their precise order. Labels turned inward now, like they didn't deserve to be seen. She shut the freezer with a soft click and locked the mudroom door behind her. Upstairs, the bedroom lights cast a warm, amber glow over her handmade quilt. The house smelled faintly of lavender linen spray and old pinewood trim. Janet carried a plate of untouched green beans and a single roll on a paper napkin. She placed it on the end table, untouched. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, hands in her lap. She could still hear the laughter downstairs, muffled now, but present. Always present. Her fingers traced the seam of her comforter as if it could tell her something she didn't already know. The door creaked slightly. Emma's voice came from the hallway, hesitant. I left you some tea on the banister, chamomile. I figured you'd want it hot. Janet smiled softly, even though Emma couldn't see it. Thank you, sweetheart. She waited until the footsteps receded. Then she rose, walked over, and poured the tea into the bathroom sink. Back in bed, she reached for her notebook. It was leather-bound, worn smooth with use. No one in the house knew it existed. On the inside cover, one name had been recently added in crisp ink. Darius Wexler. Her pen hovered for a second before she added 3 words beneath it. It's time now. Morning crept in without asking. Pale gray light slipped between the slats of Janet's blinds, painting long stripes across the hardwood floor. She didn't reach for her phone or the curtains. She just sat at the edge of her bed for a while, feet flat on the floor, hands resting in her lap, a breath, Then another. Downstairs, the smell of burnt toast floated faintly through the vents. She rose quietly and padded to her writing desk. It was tucked beside the upstairs window, shielded by a muslin curtain and half buried in knitting catalogs and mail. Janet moved like she'd done this 100 times, pulling open the third drawer, not the top one, and reached past an old rotary photo album to the back panel. A small notch. A slight push. The false back slid free with a faint wooden sigh. Inside, nestled in a manila folder and a plastic zip case, were the documents no one else in the house knew existed. She laid them out carefully on the desk. First, the deed cream-colored, blue-stamped, notarized twice. Full ownership of the property. The house, the backyard, the adjacent undeveloped parcel that the city had tried to buy 3 times. Then the will, notarized 3 years ago. Equal division between Todd and Emma. That had felt fair once, balanced. But fair looked different in hindsight. Janet turned the pages slowly, her thumb lingering on the signature lines. Her name written in strong, confident loops stared back at her like it belonged to someone who hadn't been laughed at in her own home. She paused. A small, yellow sticky note fluttered loose from the final page. "When you're ready, DW." Her breath caught. She remembered the pen he'd used. Heavy, steel, the kind a man doesn't lend out. Darius had placed it on the table 3 years ago, just before she signed, and said gently, "You'll know when." She reached for the phone, not the cordless one downstairs, her own the burner flip phone Colleen had talked her into getting just in case the internet ever went to hell. It felt ridiculous at the time. Now, it felt necessary. The line clicked twice before connecting. "Janet." Darius's voice was warm, clear, like wood polish and judgment withheld. "I've been waiting." Her eyes watered slightly, but she blinked it back before it could form. "I want the documents redrafted," she said. Her voice was calm, not bitter. "All of it." A pause. "All of it?" he asked gently. "Make it so she'll never see a dime," Janet said. Then, quieter, as if confessing something. "Not by blood, not by marriage, not by accident." She could hear Darius clicking something in the background keys on a mechanical keyboard, precise and efficient. "And Todd?" Her lips pressed into a line. "He'll understand. Eventually. You're sure you're ready?" Janet looked out the window. The oak tree in the front yard was heavy with summer green. A squirrel darted along the fence line, fast and clever. She nodded to no one. I was ready the moment she laughed. There was no response for a beat, just the faint hum of legal machinery coming to life on the other end of the line. "I'll draft the amendment and prepare the trust transfer documents," Darius said. "Everything routed through my office. You'll have final review in 2 days. Make sure it's clean," she said. "No loopholes, no appeals. I want it ironclad. You'll have my best work, Janet." She hung up without saying goodbye. Some things didn't need ceremony. Outside her door, the hallway creaked faintly. Janet rose and tucked the documents back into the hidden compartment. Her steps were quiet, deliberate, but her blood moved a little faster now. Not hot, just alert. Downstairs, she could hear Maggie talking to someone on speakerphone, loud, fake laughter. The kind meant to be overheard, meant to claim space. Janet didn't listen. Instead, she walked into her walk-in closet, pulled down the gray fireproof box from the top shelf, and opened it with a key that hadn't been used since her husband died. Inside, beneath insurance policies and pension records, was a folder she hadn't touched in years labeled in her husband's handwriting. Contingency, full transfer. Her fingers hovered over it. Janet stood at the threshold of her own kitchen, unnoticed. It wasn't the first time lately. Maggie had just finished scrubbing the countertops, or at least pretending to loud enough to suggest martyrdom. Her phone was perched on a small tripod facing the island, its camera light a tiny, watchful eye. "Meal prep Sunday," Maggie said brightly, waving a silicone spatula like a magic wand. "Caring for 2 seniors and a teen under one roof because somebody has to show up." Beep! The oven door slammed shut. Todd clinked a spoon in his coffee and nodded absently without looking up. Janet lingered 1 step back from the doorway, blending into the shadow by the stairwell. It wasn't eavesdropping if they never noticed you existed. "I swear, if I don't post this, people think I just sit around, Lacano. This is what actual care looks like. Maggie adjusted the camera angle, flashing a manicured peace sign. Doing my part for generational balance. Then she added in a flat drawl. Hashtag sandwich generation, hashtag unpaid labor, hashtag where's my wine. The hippie tone hung in the air like hairspray. Performative. Always just 1 degree too cute to question. Janet slipped back upstairs. That night, while Maggie scrolled TikToks in bed and Todd dozed with the television on, Janet stood in the mudroom holding a tiny black box in her palm, a motion-activated camera, no bigger than a matchbook. Colleen had dropped it off that afternoon, tucked inside an old coffee tin with the label peeled off. Nothing wrong with knowing what's yours, she'd said. Call it memory insurance. Janet opened the freezer door with a practiced hand. She placed the camera behind the bins of frozen vegetables angled just so, then closed the door and clicked the external magnet shut. It looked like nothing had ever been disturbed. She wiped the handle with a clean cloth, then walked away. By Monday morning, the video feed was quietly linked to her upstairs laptop. One folder, unlabeled. Just a silent eye that blinked awake when Maggie opened the door. The first clip arrived within hours. Maggie, in leggings and a color-coordinated hoodie, rifling through freezer containers. God, why does she keep so much crap in here? She muttered. Then, louder, to her phone. I'm cleaning out this war-era bunker today. If I disappear, avenge me. That evening, Janet opened her laptop and watched the clip twice. No emotion on her face. Just the faint click of her nails against the trackpad as she saved it to an external drive marked with an old garden label. Potato seeds do not discard. By Wednesday, there were 3 more. On Thursday, Colleen arrived in her usual no-nonsense way, a quilted vest over a sweatshirt, hair pulled back like she had plans to fix a tractor. She carried her phone with a smug grin plastered across her face. You need to see this, she said. That daughter-in-law of yours just turned you into content. Janet took the phone. The video was already playing. Maggie holding a spoon, talking to camera. Leftovers for the grandparents again. I'm doing my best not to eat their meals, but honestly, if I disappear one day, check the stew. Underneath, the caption read, Still feeding the greatest generation number. Caretaker Chronicles number, pray for me. The comments were worse. Girl, I'd lose it living with mine. You deserve a medal. Send her to a home already. Janet set the phone down without a word. Colleen lowered her voice. Want me to respond? Because I can light that woman up. No, Janet said. Her voice was soft, but steady. Let her talk. Every word she says is just another piece of the puzzle. That night, while brushing her teeth, Emma peeked into Janet's room. I saw Mom's post, she said. It's not right. She makes you sound like you're just here, like a chore. Janet met her granddaughter's eyes in the mirror. Are you all right? Emma shrugged. I think people forget you hear things, even when they're not talking to you. Janet dabbed her mouth with a towel. They only forget when it's convenient. After Emma left, Janet sat in her reading chair, laptop balanced on her knees. She clicked open the Wi-Fi feed. The camera blinked to life. In the dim blue glow of the screen, she watched Maggie peel off another freezer label and slap on a new one, then roll her eyes and snap a selfie. Janet didn't look away. She simply clicked download, then duplicate, then moved the file to a new folder she had just created. Its name was simple. Burden labeled. The notary's office smelled like laminate and peppermint gum, the kind that lingered in the air long after someone had chewed it with too much jaw tension. Janet sat across from a square-jawed woman in a state-issued blazer, her back straight, her eyes forward. The manila envelope between them looked harmless. Paper always did. I'll sign where you've marked, Janet said, her voice calm. She wasn't asking for clarification. Darius, on speakerphone, cleared his throat gently. We've transferred everything to the trust. Home, savings, the second lot, all personal property of significant value. Beneficiary named, conditions locked. The notary looked up. Is this your full intent, Mrs. Rhodes? Janet didn't blink. It's the clearest I've ever been. She signed once, then again, then dated the final page. The pen didn't shake. Colleen stood behind her, arms folded, chewing peppermint gum with slow satisfaction. This isn't petty, she said to no one in particular. It's protection. Back in the car, Janet sat in silence for a while before putting on her seatbelt. Her hands rested still in her lap, but her pulse ran like something long buried had just sat up. "You want lunch?" Colleen asked. "Or should we go full outlaw and swing by the gun range?" Janet allowed herself the hint of a smile. "I want to stop by the nursery. Emma's sunflower died last week. I want to replace it before she notices." Colleen nodded. "That's legacy, right there." I'd. By the time they got home, Maggie was pacing in the kitchen, her voice high and energized. A measuring tape was draped around her neck like a scarf, and 3 crumpled Pinterest printouts littered the counter. "We've been thinking," she said brightly, gesturing to Todd, who looked vaguely stunned, "about doing a refresh in the living room, something family-oriented, a real upgrade, maybe a breakfast nook, even knock down that wall to open the space." Janet removed her sunglasses slowly. "How exciting." "So we're asking everyone to pitch in nothing huge. Just, 10,000 from each household contributor. You'd get final approval on the fixtures, of course." Janet paused, then smiled, cool as ice water in a porcelain cup. "I'll contribute something better." Maggie blinked. "Oh?" Janet leaned forward just slightly. "Security." There was a beat of silence, not confusion, tension. She turned to Todd. "You'll be getting an email from Darius Wexler this week. You'll want to read it closely." Todd's brow furrowed. "About what?" "About structure," Janet said. Then she picked up a mug, her favorite one, white with a faint blue line around the rim, and walked it slowly to the sink. "And what happens when people build their lives on top of something they don't own?" Upstairs, her laptop dinged with a file sync alert. The trust documents had been finalized, fully encrypted, filed under a new folder. Emma, 100% beneficiary. Irrevocable. That night, Janet sat in her bedroom, the sunflower freshly potted in the window behind her. Emma stood nearby, drying her hands from dinner dishes. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Janet reached into a drawer and pulled out the label maker Colleen had given her years ago, back when everything had still been balanced. She typed in a word slowly, deliberately. Inheritance. She handed the label to Emma. "For your sketchbook," she said. "Or wherever you need to remember what belongs to you." Emma looked at the small piece of adhesive plastic, eyes wide. She didn't ask anything, just nodded. The banker was young, probably still in his 20s, and a little too confident in how he held his tablet, like he thought the tech made him an authority on power. Janet watched his stylus hover over the form. "So to confirm, you're restricting all co-access?" "That's correct," she said. "No one else is on the account. I'd like biometric verification, only retina and fingerprint both." He blinked. "That's a high security tier. Most clients don't request." "I'm not most clients." She said it gently, but the air in the office shifted. Darius, patched in via Janet's phone speaker, cleared his throat from across the state line. "I'll also be submitting a third-party interference block," he added. "Anything that looks like asset movement, credit card requests, or estate modification from anyone but Janet. Lock it, flag it, and call me directly." Janet placed her palm on the biometric scanner. It blinked green. The banker swallowed. "Understood." That weekend, Maggie banged a cabinet door with theatrical precision. "Why is the freezer always full of her junk?" she said to no one in particular, though her eyes flicked toward Janet. Janet didn't flinch. She opened a kitchen drawer, pulled out her keys, and walked toward the mudroom door. "I'll be moving my items to the garage." "The garage?" Maggie frowned. "But that's—" Janet turned back slowly. "Mine." The detached garage smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, like it had been holding its breath since her husband died. The second freezer sat in the corner, old but reliable, humming quietly beside a stack of folding lawn chairs and a rusted tackle box. She moved everything by hand, no help requested. None offered. Her Tupperware, her labeled leftovers, her soups and stews made from scratch. The old meat bags were gone now, tossed weeks ago, but the memory of them stayed like a burn you couldn't quite see. After the final transfer, Janet closed the lid and snapped a silver padlock shut. Not dramatic, just permanent. Inside the house, Emma passed her in the hallway, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. She slipped a folded piece of paper into Janet's sweater pocket without breaking stride. Janet opened it later in the safety of her room. "Whatever you're doing, Keep going. The handwriting was small, but steady. That evening, Colleen arrived with a plastic shopping bag and a glint in her eye. I brought reinforcements. Inside were new freezer bags, heavy-duty, zipper sealed, a far cry from the flimsy grocery store kind Maggie preferred. But what stood out was the label. Legacy Storage, it read. Elegant font, gold lettering. Janet held the bag in her hand, thumb brushing the curve of the Z. You need any help swapping things over? Colleen asked. Janet smiled faintly. Number this part I want to do alone. She stayed up late that night, unpacking her meals one by one: chili, slow-cooked roast, lasagna slices wrapped in wax paper, and repackaging them with meticulous care. Each item was labeled in clean handwriting, the bags neatly stacked, the contents sealed. She placed them in rows, like chapters. Not food, not just storage. Evidence of care. At 3:12 a.m., Janet woke with a strange chill in her fingertips. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She pulled on her robe and moved, silently downstairs, drawn to the kitchen like something unsaid was still breathing there. The mug she'd left on the counter, the one Emma had filled with her chamomile blend, was gone. So was the pill organizer she always kept by the sink. Her breath caught. She opened the cabinet where she kept the replacement vitamins. One bottle had been moved slightly out of alignment. Janet didn't panic. She didn't cry. She just stood still for a long moment, her fingers curling into her palm. Then she turned and walked back upstairs. She opened her laptop, navigated to the freezer cam folder, and renamed it. Burden, labeled, became contingency, active. She clicked into her files and opened a new document. Date, active monitoring initiated. Reason, potential tampering. She didn't type more. She didn't need to. The new pillbox was weighty, not in size, but in consequence. It clicked open with a satisfying snap. Each compartment stamped with the day of the week in clean block letters monitored, logged, and reviewed by the Walgreens pharmacist down the street. Janet had requested the extra service quietly, without explanation. The young tech hadn't asked questions. He didn't need to. Back home, she knelt beside her bedside dresser and pulled out the bottom drawer, then reached behind it, where her husband had once stashed old car keys and spare cash. The hidden panel gave easily under pressure. She placed the locked metal case inside pills, counted, time-stamped, monitored, then slid the panel back into place and turned the drawer's small brass key. It clicked into silence like it had been waiting for something more than sweaters and old receipts. She stood, exhaled, then opened her notebook and wrote down the time. 11:42 a.m. All medications secured. Just above it, yesterday's entry was still drying in ink. Something shifted. I won't wait to prove it. 2 days later, at the clinic, Dr. Van Allen raised a salt and pepper brow as he examined Janet's printouts. Levels are good. No inconsistencies. No gaps in your refill history either. Did something change in your routine? Janet kept her gaze even. Let's just say I've started treating myself like a case file. He chuckled, then realized she wasn't joking. I'll sign off on full consistency. You'll have a time-stamped note from me by this afternoon, he said, flipping through her chart. You're sharper than half the 40-year-olds I see. I have to be. As she left the office, her phone buzzed. Emma. She rarely texted during school. One new message. MR? Can I show you something later? Video from brunch last weekend. Mom said something I think you need to hear. Janet stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over reply. Instead, she walked faster toward the car. That evening, the kitchen felt colder than usual. The dishwasher rattled. The lights flickered once. Maggie was in the living room laughing loudly on speakerphone. Emma sat on Janet's bed, cross-legged, her phone in hand. She played the clip. The video opened on a crowded brunch table: mimosas, half-eaten pancakes, the sound of ambient clatter. Maggie was in mid-sentence, leaning in for effect, smirking like she was playing to a camera she didn't know was rolling. I swear, if we're lucky, we'll only have to wait a couple more years. 1 down, 2 to go, she said, then tapped her glass. Cheers to early exits. Janet's face didn't move. She mean you and me? Emma looked down. I think so. Janet tapped the screen, paused it, zoomed in on Maggie's face, the carelessness, the gleam of it. Then she spoke. quiet and clean. Let's start with one. Colleen arrived an hour later, dragging a folding chair and 2 foil-wrapped containers of shepherd's pie. You've got about 36 more hours before I take this to the sheriff's office myself, she said, setting the food down like it was ammunition. Janet poured 2 mugs of tea. I have medical proof, legal backup, video evidence. I know what I'm doing. Colleen sat hard in the chair. Good. Then maybe it's time for a fireproof revenge plan. Janet looked at her. Just looked. Calm, sharp, surgical. It's already lit. She reached under the couch cushion and pulled out a flash drive, labeled in tidy handwriting. CR Phase 1. Colleen raised an eyebrow. What's CR? Contingency response. And Phase 2? Janet didn't answer. The county building on Sheridan Road hadn't changed in 40 years. Same chipped marble floors, same scuffed counters, same clock above the service desk, eternally wrong. Janet stood at the 3rd-floor reception window, papers tucked neatly in a navy folder. A small gold JR monogram was embossed in the corner, a gift from her late husband, back when signatures came with trust instead of caution. The clerk behind the glass glanced at the first page. Elder wellness petition? She asked, voice neutral. Janet nodded once. Confidential, please. And mark it priority. The woman blinked, then looked closer at the 2nd form. Her expression changed. You've got everything filled in. With evidence? Yes, Janet said. With timestamps. She handed over the folder like she was passing off a lit match. Oh. By Thursday, the call came. This is Miss Gorman from the Kenosha Adult Protective Services Division. We'll be doing a surprise wellness check within the next 10 days. Please do not alert other household members. Janet looked at the freezer cam footage paused on her screen. Maggie grinning smugly, her hand hovering over a spice jar. I won't say a word, she said. Oh, that weekend. Maggie stood in the hallway holding a pile of freshly folded towels like a weapon. So I heard from Todd, you've been acting strange. Janet looked up from her crossword. Define strange. Oh, you know. Maggie's voice dipped into its usual syrupy tone. Locking up your pills, reorganizing the garage, doing whatever you're doing. You're not some courtroom victim, Janet. This isn't one of those Lifetime movies. Janet folded her newspaper and met her eyes. Keep underestimating me, she said, voice steady. I'm counting on it. For the first time, Maggie blinked first. Oh. The next day, Emma climbed the attic stairs with a box labeled Hodes, 1964, 2001 scrawled in faded Sharpie. Want to go through some of these? She asked, breathless. I need some old photos for my digital art class. Janet opened the box with careful hands. Dozens of prints spilled out Polaroids, school portraits, vacation snapshots with yellowing edges, her own face, younger, beside her late husband. Todd at age 7, holding a fishing rod, a baby blanket Emma once carried everywhere. But something struck her as she sorted. The recent years, birthdays, Thanksgivings, even Emma's middle school graduation, all had one quiet thing in common. Maggie wasn't in any of them. Not a single one. Janet held up a Christmas photo from 2 years ago. Todd smiling stiffly. Emma clinging to Janet's side. An empty chair beside them. She was always taking the photo, Emma offered, almost apologetically. No, Janet said. She was always outside the frame. She placed the photo aside, opened a new folder on her desk, labeled it Documentation, Absence Pattern. Oh. At dinner, Todd ate with his eyes glued to his plate. No phone, no words. He nodded when Maggie spoke, flinched slightly when Janet passed him the salt. Maggie filled the space with empty chatter. That patio needs new lights. I saw the cutest ones on clearance at Home Goods. Maybe we could string them across the yard? Like a rustic bistro vibe? Janet didn't respond. Emma caught her eye. A flicker of understanding passed between them. Maggie kept talking. And Todd, he just chewed. Like the silence tasted safer. Oh. Later that night, Janet opened her email. A message from APS had arrived. Miss Rhodes' site visit confirmed. Next 72 hours. Discretion guaranteed. We appreciate your courage. Janet stared at the words, then clicked print. Oh. The knock came just as Maggie's voice reached its highest octave. I'm not asking for much. Just 1 square foot of freezer space that isn't packed with 80-year-old stew. The front door rattled with a polite rhythm. 3 quick taps, followed by a longer pause. Janet rose slowly from her armchair, smoothing the front of her cardigan like she had all the time in the world. Maggie groaned. If that's Colleen again with another jar of organic pickles, I swear. Janet was already at the door. Miss Rhodes? The woman on the porch wore dark slacks, a blazer too practical to be stylish, and a soft leather case slung over one shoulder. Her badge read, Gorman, Apps Field Investigator. Yes, come in, Janet said with a warmth that felt just north of Southern hospitality and just south of warning. The moment the social worker crossed the threshold, the air shifted. Maggie froze mid-rant, the freezer door still open behind her. Todd looked up from his phone, startled like a deer catching headlights through glass. I'm conducting a routine check, Miss Gorman said, scanning the room with an expert's stillness. It won't take long. Maggie laughed too loudly. Oh, this is about Mom's little meltdown, isn't it? She's been feeling theatrical lately. You know, post-70s paranoia or whatever. Janet turned. Why don't we start in the kitchen? Miss Gorman followed her to the mudroom. Janet opened the main freezer and gestured inside. You'll notice there are no current items marked old meat, but I have saved photo evidence. The bags were labeled in someone else's handwriting. I also have logs of my medications, timestamps of when bottles were disturbed, and a list of changed routines tracked via personal journal. Any direct tampering? The social worker asked. Janet didn't hesitate. Not proven, but enough to initiate this visit. Emma stood quietly in the hallway, her sketchbook clutched tightly. As Miss Gorman turned to leave the freezer area, Emma stepped forward. Excuse me, she said softly, and handed the investigator a small phone. I saved some of my mom's texts, just in case. I think you should see them. Gorman scrolled. Silence. Then, do you mind if I airdrop these to our internal archive? Emma nodded. Maggie had re-entered by now. Her arms crossed tight over her chest. This is completely unnecessary. She's just upset I rearranged her old food. If we're reporting that as abuse now, I've got a whole sorority fridge from 2005 that deserves jail time. Ma'am, Gorman said, still calm, I'll be speaking with each of you separately. Please have a seat. Maggie opened her mouth again and was met with a raised hand. Not rude, not emotional, just firm. Dismissed. She scoffed and stalked back toward the couch. Todd hovered behind the kitchen island, blinking like a man trying to find the emergency exit in a fireproof room. I wasn't really paying attention, he said, his voice smaller than it had ever been. I mean, I didn't see anything dangerous. Maybe I just wasn't looking? That's usually how it starts, Gorman said, jotting something in her notes. Then the door creaked open again. Colleen walked in like she owned the county. Hope I'm not interrupting, she said, tossing a manila folder onto the counter. Photos. Laminated. Freezer labels. 2 angles. Dated. I made extras. Maggie's jaw visibly tightened. Gorman flipped through them. Lips pursed. Janet, still calm, poured herself a cup of tea and leaned against the counter. If you'd like to speak to me privately, she said. The study's quiet. Gorman nodded. In a moment. She turned to Maggie, who was now fidgeting with her phone, thumbs tapping furiously. Please put that away, the social worker said. It's just Instagram, Maggie muttered. Not anymore. I know her. The envelope was hand-delivered. Not by a courier, but by Colleen, who wore her church blazer like a badge of intent and handed it to Maggie at the breakfast table with all the ceremony of serving an eviction notice on a silver platter. This came through Darius Wexler's office, she said, her voice light. Thought I'd save the postage. Maggie blinked at the embossed seal, then tore it open, her nail polish chipping on the adhesive. As her eyes scanned the contents, her posture stiffened. Todd looked over her shoulder. What's this? It's a notice to vacate, Maggie hissed. Janet walked in, calm as snowfall. 30 days. Effective immediately, per the terms of the updated trust. You can't just kick us out of the house. Maggie stood, the letter crumpling slightly in her grip. We're family. Janet poured herself coffee and stirred it gently. Family doesn't come with immunity. Todd's voice cracked. You're pushing us out. Janet didn't look up. You pushed first. At the freezer. Silence clamped the room like a lid. I know her. Later that afternoon, Janet sat at her desk, documenting her decision with deliberate clarity. She opened a Word doc titled Occupancy Termination Justification. Reason: Unsafe household environment. Supporting documents: 43 files, timestamps, video, photographs, medical statements, witnesses: Emma Rhodes, Colleen Marks, APS investigator, Miss Gorman. She saved it twice, once to her encrypted drive, and once to a printed folder labeled Final Phase Authorization, DW. I know her. Emma knocked gently before entering, her suitcase already half-zipped on the floor behind her. I started packing, she said, brushing hair behind her ear. I don't want to wait. Janet looked up from her paperwork. You're not required to leave. Emma hesitated. I know, but I want to live with you. Not near her. Not anymore. Janet's eyes softened. Then we'll make space. Real space. They sat together in silence. The only sound, the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the ticking of Janet's clock, steady, centered. I know her. Maggie's unraveling came loud and digital. She posted a video within the hour, a 3-minute clip from the front porch, tears streaking her eyeliner. She's turning my own daughter against me. She's weaponizing grief and calling it justice. This is elder abuse in reverse. In the background, the wind chimes rang. Underneath, the comments started flooding. Wait, isn't this the woman who made those freezer jokes? Karma's fast when you play fake online. Isn't her MIL the one with the real deed? 3 hours later, the video disappeared. Then her entire Instagram page wiped. Janet didn't say anything. She just watched it vanish, like a stain being lifted from glass. I know her. That night, Darius called. His voice carried a restrained satisfaction. She's threatening legal action, claims emotional distress, property sabotage. Let her, Janet replied. She won't get far. We have footage, timestamps, formal APS involvement, witness statements. He paused. Janet, she's the one under review now. Not you. Janet exhaled slowly. The relief didn't come with fireworks, just a deep, cellular stillness, like settling into a foundation that had always been hers. She picked the wrong cold storage, she said. I was never the perishable one. Oh. The courtroom was colder than Janet expected. Not the kind of cold you could feel in your bones, the kind that lived in linoleum floors and fluorescent lighting. Bureaucratic chill. A place built to flatten emotion. She sat beside Darius, who adjusted his tie once and then didn't move again. His leather briefcase rested neatly on the table, unopened but humming with certainty. Across the aisle, Maggie sat rigid, her lawyer whispering into her ear with the urgency of someone realizing the client hadn't told them everything. She wore a charcoal gray blazer, her serious outfit, but her foundation was too heavy, and her lips kept twitching with every sideways glance toward Emma. Todd sat behind them, alone. He looked older than he had just a month ago. The judge entered without drama. No gavel strike, just presence. A tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the energy of someone who had seen too many performative breakdowns to flinch. Case 18, CV 4021, the clerk called. Maggie Rhodes versus Janet Rhodes. Darius rose. Your Honor? He began smoothly. We move for immediate dismissal. The plaintiff's claim of emotional abuse and fraudulent removal is contradicted by documented evidence submitted in advance, including video footage, written messages, and a signed APS investigator's report. He clicked a remote. The screen beside the bench lit up with the grainy clip from Janet's hidden camera. Maggie, labeling a bag of soup, laughing to her phone. Still feeding the greatest generation, pray for me. Then another video. Maggie tapping a glass at brunch. 1 down, 2 to go. The judge held up a hand. I've seen enough. She turned to Maggie. Do you understand that bringing a case based on false emotional abuse not only diminishes actual victims, but undermines the credibility of your own family history? Maggie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Do you dispute the footage? No, but do you dispute the ownership of the property or the authority of the trust? No, but then what exactly is left to argue? The courtroom fell still. Maggie sat down slowly. The judge turned her eyes to Janet. Mrs. Rhodes, I commend your documentation and composure. If you choose to pursue a countersuit for harassment or defamation, the court would be inclined to hear it. Janet shook her head gently. I'm not interested in more war, just peace. The judge nodded. Case dismissed. The gavel struck once, and just like that, the tension that had ruled their household for months broke clean. Oh, Todd burst into tears on the bench. Not sobs, just steady, silent weeping. His face crumpled in on itself like a man who'd finally heard the sound of his own inaction. He didn't look at Janet. He didn't have to. Oh, outside the courthouse, the sun was sharp and bright, the kind that made everything feel too honest. Emma reached for Janet's hand as they walked down the steps, their pace slow, unhurried. You've already won, Emma said softly. Janet glanced at her, her granddaughter's face clear, sure, and utterly unafraid. No, Janet replied. We both did. Oh. Behind them, Maggie stormed out, heels clacking against the concrete. She shoved past a man with a clipboard and nearly knocked over a newspaper dispenser. Her phone was back in her hand, but the screen was black. Janet didn't turn. Darius held the car door for her like they were leaving a benefit gala. Want me to file the motion for gag order? He asked casually. Janet raised an eyebrow. She's already muted. Oh. The fire pit in Colleen's backyard was small, built from old bricks and circled with mismatched lawn chairs. Janet stood beside it with a cardboard box in her hands, nothing fancy, just a shipping box with a dented corner and fading Amazon tape across the seam. Inside were the last of the old freezer bags, the ones Maggie had labeled. Janet held one up. Old meat. You soon. The marker had bled through the plastic over time, leaving a shadow on the reverse side, a stain that never quite faded. Colleen tossed in a match. The flames caught low, then flared upward, orange tongues licking at the edges of each label. One by one, Janet fed the bags into the pit. No commentary, just quiet punctuation. When the last one curled black at the edges, Colleen nudged a stick into the ash and muttered, Now that's the kind of recycling I believe in. Janet gave a half smile, the kind that came from deep exhale and slow repair. Oh. Back at the house, Emma was reorganizing the pantry. She pulled out a box of new freezer bags, thick, resealable, with rounded corners and matte labels already affixed. She held one up. Family. Not forgotten. Printed in soft navy blue, the words looked more like a signature than a warning. I like them, Emma said. They feel earned. Janet took the box from her gently. They are. Oh. Later that night, the kitchen filled with the smell of garlic, tomatoes, and something richer thyme. Janet moved with quiet purpose, layering ricotta, sauce, and noodles like she'd done 100 times before. But this time, she didn't rush. There was no pressure to feed resentment, only legacy. When she pulled the lasagna from the oven, Emma was already waiting at the table, her sketchbook open beside her. They ate in silence for the first few bites. Then Emma set down her fork. This is better than anything Mom ever made. Janet didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She simply passed the basket of bread, and Emma took another slice without asking. Upstairs, Janet opened the drawer that used to hold contingency files. Now it held something cleaner. A single blue folder labeled Rhodes, Emma Legacy Fund in embossed lettering. She removed the old binder, the one marked just Rhodes Family Trust. Its pages were stiff from years of printing and reprinting, signatures lined like graves. Janet flipped to the last page. She crossed out Todd's name, crossed out Maggie's, checked Emma's. Then, beneath final designation, she wrote in her own looping script, 100%, no conditions, irrevocable. She signed and dated the amendment. Darius had already drafted the paperwork. She was just sealing the story. Colleen dropped by later with a bag of Trader Joe's wine and an envelope labeled just in case someone tries anything stupid. You done now? She asked, slumping into the kitchen chair with a satisfied grunt. Janet poured 2 glasses and slid one across the table. I'm not done. I'm clear. They clinked their glasses. Light. Not celebratory, more like confirmation. 1 label, 1 house, 1 heir, Colleen said, raising her glass. That's a win. Janet raised hers back. To accuracy. The house was quieter now, but not in the way silence used to feel. No tension pulsed beneath the floorboards, no sharp laughter echoing down the hall. The air no longer felt filtered through someone else's control. It was just quiet and warm. Janet moved through the space like she was rediscovering it. Curtains tied back, windows cracked for fresh air, music playing softly through the old Bose speaker she'd almost donated last spring. A new rug stretched across the living room, nothing flashy, just soft and hand-woven, something she and Emma picked together on a Sunday when the world finally felt slow. That night, she hosted her first dinner in over a year. 3 friends from the neighborhood came, women who'd known her through book clubs, PTA bake sales, and the years after her husband passed when she didn't say much, but always showed up with potato salad. They brought wine, laughter, and questions that didn't require performance. Colleen held court from the head of the table, naturally. "It's about damn time this house had a reset," she said between bites of lemon chicken. "No offense, but Maggie always looked like she was 5 seconds away from editing your spice rack with a blowtorch." Janet laughed, not out of politeness, but something lighter, real. The walls didn't feel like they were listening anymore. They just held space. Upstairs, Emma dipped her paintbrush into a tray of soft gray. The guest room, her room, now was halfway repainted, the old beige walls disappearing beneath each confident stroke. She had taped up sketches of layout ideas on the closet door, a reading corner, a keyboard under the window, shelves for her art supplies. When Janet peeked in, Emma grinned, face streaked with a swipe of paint. "Hope you like gray," she said. "It's a grounding color." Janet leaned against the doorframe. "It's your space now. Ground it however you like." 2 days later, Colleen returned with a thick, leather-bound binder. No title on the front, just a red ribbon bookmark and a faint smell of rosemary. "It was my grandmother's," she said, setting it on the counter. "Then my mom's, then mine. It's yours now." Janet opened it. Handwritten recipes, passed down in cursive loops and margin notes, filled every page. "Add more thyme if bitter. Use glass dish, not metal, trust me." At the back was a folded note. "A family isn't what you inherit. It's what you feed." Janet closed the binder carefully, her hands still for a moment. Then she smiled. "I'll keep it hot." That night, she sat at her computer with a mug of peppermint tea and a list. Her passwords. Each one got updated. No more Todd's birthday. No more Maggie's maiden name. No more combinations built for the benefit of those who didn't earn them. She changed everything to reflect who she was now, who she'd become. Legacy 22, Rhodes Fund dollar Emma, Sunset Freeze 74 reals, each one like a lock clicking shut behind her. Then she opened her security system app and enabled the upgrade Darius had insisted on. Facial recognition, interior sensors, silent panic alarm, emergency line direct to APS. The whole house blinked online with a soft blue glow. Emma walked past behind her, a cup of cocoa in her hands. "Sleep okay last night?" Janet nodded. "Like it used to. Feel. Like it's mine." End teen. The news van rolled up slow, tires crunching on the gravel like it knew better than to rush. Janet stood on the porch, a fresh pitcher of lemonade in her hand, her floral blouse pressed, pearls understated. Emma sat beside her, sketchbook in her lap, watching the cameraman unload his gear with an artist's curiosity. "Just a few questions, Miss Rhodes," the anchor said, young and polite, with shoes too clean for real reporting. "Your story's gone semi-viral on the community site. They're calling it the Freezer Rebellion." Janet raised an eyebrow. "Catchy." The segment was filmed in the living room, natural light pouring through the newly washed windows. The interviewer asked about legacy planning, intergenerational housing stress, and the quiet forms of harm most people never report. Janet answered each question with a calm, measured cadence. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said. "I just stopped pretending I hadn't noticed." Emma spoke too, her voice soft but sure. She didn't take anything. She reclaimed it. When the clip aired that night, it ended with a long shot of the two of them walking through the backyard, side by side. "How legacy can be reclaimed," the headline read beneath the station's logo. End quote. 3 days later, Darius called from Washington, D.C., his voice buzzed with purpose. "They're using your case at the National Elder Rights Summit next month," he said. "Panel on covert abuse and passive inheritance threats. I'm one of the keynote speakers." Janet sipped her coffee. Make sure they know I'm not interested in applause. Too late. You've already become instructional, she chuckled. That's a first, he paused. You were always the quietest one in the room. Janet smiled into her mug. Turns out I was just listening louder than the rest. End quote. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Maggie opened an email that turned her face to stone. Her application to the Harmony Haven Home Health Network had been reviewed and declined. No explanation. Just one line at the bottom. Due to prior documentation concerns, we cannot proceed. She tried calling, left messages, checked LinkedIn. Nothing. Her name wasn't just flagged, it was buried. Offline. Invisible. Legacy, it turned out, had long arms. End quote. Todd emailed 2 weeks later. It wasn't long. Subject: you were right. Mom, I didn't see it. Or maybe I did and just didn't want to deal with it. Either way, you were right. I'm staying with Greg for now. I won't make excuses. Just thank you for protecting Emma when I didn't. Todd. Janet read it twice. She typed only 4 words in return. I've always been. J. Then she archived the message without ceremony. End teen. That night, Emma brought her a small canvas charcoal sketch, rough-lined and bold. It showed the freezer door, slightly ajar, and inside it, light. No food, no frost, just radiance spilling out like memory. Janet blinked once. You took their label, Emma said, and wrote your own. Janet placed a hand over the drawing, and this time, no one else gets to edit it. End teen. The next morning, a sealed envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Petition for conservatorship reversal. Filed. Maggie Rhodes. Basis: alleged coercion by beneficiary, Emma Rhodes. Janet didn't panic. She turned the page over. There was a handwritten note on the back in Maggie's unmistakable script. If I can't own it, I'll ruin it. End teen. Thanksgiving morning arrived, wrapped in a crisp gold light, the kind that filtered through bare tree limbs and made every corner of the house look intentional. Janet opened the kitchen window and let the cool air cut through the scent of sage and roasting garlic. No yelling, no stomping, no second-hand performance echoing down the hall. Just quiet again, but this time full of presence. The table was set by noon. Linen runner, hand-thrown plates, glasses that didn't match perfectly, which made them perfect. A white ceramic dish held a low arrangement of pine cones, rosemary sprigs, and rust-colored taper candles. In the center, a small standing card Emma had lettered in dark ink. We kept what mattered. Janet adjusted it once, then let her hand rest beside it like a blessing. End teen. Colleen arrived first, of course, dragging a casserole dish and 2 bottles of wine like she'd been preparing for a siege. I swear if anyone tries to trauma dump today, I will physically gag them with stuffing, she announced, kicking off her boots and kissing Janet on the cheek. Janet just smiled. It's a quiet house now. You'll be disappointed. Good. I came for food, not flashbacks. They laughed, and this time, the sound didn't bounce against defensiveness. It just filled the room and landed soft. End teen. Emma floated in and out of the kitchen, hair still damp from her shower, wearing a cardigan Janet hadn't seen in months, pale blue, loose at the sleeves, the kind that made her look like the kid she'd once been. She arranged the cranberry sauce with surgical precision, lined the sweet potatoes in perfect rows. She even set out a playlist on her phone. Soft folk, quiet piano, a few Motown tracks sneaking in between. No playlists made by Maggie. No passive-aggressive podcast playing in the background. No performative commentary over pie crusts. Just music. And laughter. And breath. At 3 o'clock sharp, they sat. Just 5 of them, Janet, Emma, Colleen, and 2 friends from the neighborhood who'd been there for the potato salad years. Colleen carved the turkey like she'd been training for it, tongue between her teeth, narrating her every move like a Food Network voiceover. No dry breast on my watch, ladies. This bird gave its life. We're honoring it properly. Janet passed the rolls, poured the cider, watched Emma reach for seconds without glancing around first, like no one's approval mattered anymore. She leaned over during the meal, brushed her hand gently across Emma's wrist. You look lighter. Emma grinned. I feel like I'm home. Janet smiled back, small, deep, earned. The fridge hummed in the background. So did the freezer. Inside them, clean labels, real meals, no hidden jokes, no edits, just lasagna, chili, pumpkin scones, Emma's leftover stir-fry in the good Tupperware. No more bagged warnings, no more insult buried under pretense. Just food, just care, just storage that meant survival, not scorekeeping. Janet stood at the sink after dessert, rinsing plates as the others gathered in the living room. She paused for a moment, hand resting on the faucet. She remembered the freezer the night she first saw the label. Old meat, use soon. She thought of how far they'd come, and how much further they were willing to go. As night fell, the last candle guttered low, and Emma slipped into the kitchen with a blanket over her shoulders. Want me to put the leftovers away? Janet nodded. Top shelf's yours now. Emma opened the fridge, paused, then smiled. Feels right? Janet didn't answer. She didn't need to. She walked back to the living room, poured herself a splash of wine, and sat in the quiet with her hands folded over her lap, the glow of the fireplace flickering across her face. She closed her eyes for just a second. The garage smelled like cedar and faint electricity. The old freezer sat in the corner, humming its low, tired song, the same hum it had carried through weddings, funerals, holidays, and slow Wednesdays, where nothing happened except survival. Janet stood before it, a small brass key between her fingers. She'd oiled the lock the night before, not because it squeaked, but because final acts deserved care. She opened it once, slowly, like paying last respects. Inside, nothing. No food, no labels. Just frost along the inner rim, crusted like time's own fingerprint. A ghost storage. A chamber that once held resentment disguised as routine. She closed the lid and clicked the padlock into place. Beside her, Emma knelt and peeled the backing off a soft linen label she'd made herself. She pressed it gently to the freezer's front. Memory, do not reopen. They stood in silence, side by side. Not grief, not fear, just boundary. That afternoon, a new painting was hung in the living room, not above the fireplace, but beside the kitchen doorway, right where you'd see it coming in with grocery bags or a warm plate in hand. Emma's work, digital, sharp, lined, and saturated with emotion. It showed a house at twilight, snow on the roof, golden light pouring from the kitchen window. In the center, the silhouette of a woman, facing the open fridge, a young girl beside her. But the food inside glowed. Not cold, not sealed, just illuminated. Janet stared at it for a long time. She said it's not about revenge, Emma told Colleen later. It's about remembering how to feed someone right. The first snow arrived late, thin at first, then thick and deliberate. Janet watched it fall from the front porch, wrapped in a knitted shawl older than Emma but softer than any new thing could hope to be. The air smelled like wood smoke and slow closure. Colleen sat beside her, cradling a mug. So, it's really over? Janet didn't answer right away. She just smiled faintly, her breath visible in the cold. Then turned her head, eyes still fixed on the snow. I was never cold, she said, just waiting to warm up. Emma joined them a moment later. 2 mugs of tea in hand, chamomile and ginger, steeped just right. She handed one to her grandmother and curled up beside her, a blanket already trailing from her shoulders. Inside the house, the new security system blinked once a soft blue pulse. No motion? No threat? Just presence. They sat like that a long while, until the snow blanketed the yard, until the quiet had fully settled, until the cold stopped meaning distance and started meaning clarity. And when the porch light flickered on with its automatic click, Janet took one last sip, set her mug down, and spoke into the silence. She labeled me old meat. I labeled her forgotten, and I kept everything that truly feeds a legacy.